So I think we can start. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to welcome you here, and I'm very happy that we are now inside. Rain just started at 7, so we can start our talk now inside this space and feel cozy. My name is Britta Peters. I'm the artistic director of Urbane Künste Ruhr. Next to me is Asad Raza, the artist of this piece, Absorption, and Gerd Wessolek. He is a soil scientist. I'm going to introduce him later with a few more words. And we are going to talk about absorption, and you're very welcome to ask questions. I propose to do like a Denglish version, like ich werde manchmal Deutsch sprechen, wenn Asad vielleicht sowieso weiß, was ich erzählen will, weil ich ihn gerade vorstelle, und in anderen Momenten switche ich dann wieder ins Englische, und genauso sind auch Sie herzlich eingeladen, auf allen Sprachen Fragen zu stellen oder zu kommentieren. Ich habe Absorption in einer wesentlich kleineren Version gesehen in Berlin in der Ausstellung Down to Earth, die als kuratorisches Konzept hatte, wirklich komplett ohne Elektrizität zu arbeiten. Man also nur Arbeiten zu sehen von Künstlerinnen und Künstlern, wie beispielsweise Langtime-Performance von Tino Segal oder Vorträge, die gehalten wurden, wurden mit Fotokopien gezeigt, weil es kein Video gab und kein Strom. Und Asad hatte eine kleinere Version von Absorption im Martin-Gropius-Bau. Und ich bin sofort in Kontakt gekommen mit jemand von den Cultivators. Das Konzept werden wir später noch vorstellen. Und habe angefangen, mich mit ihr über Erde zu unterhalten und gemerkt, dass es irgendwie sehr viel gibt, was man über Erde wissen kann, was ich aber nicht wusste. Ich fand es sehr interessant. Und so ist diese Einladung zustande gekommen, dass ich gesagt habe, wir machen von Urbane Künste Ruhr auch immer einen Beitrag zur Ruhr-Triennale. Ich kann mir das sehr gut vorstellen als eine große Installation zur Ruhr-Triennale. Insofern haben wir dann eröffnet am 14. August und zeigen die Arbeit jetzt noch bis zum 25. September. Und meine ursprüngliche Idee war, ich wollte immer in ein leerstehendes Kaufhaus, weil ich das Gefühl habe, das macht in vieler Hinsicht Sinn. Und direkt in Essen, direkt gegenüber vom Bahnhof, gibt es dieses große ehemalige Kaufhausgebäude. Und insofern haben wir angefangen zu fragen, ob wir das nutzen können. Die bauen aber gerade um. Und die Stadt Essen hat uns dann geholfen, dieses Haus zu finden, was auch ursprünglich mal ein Kaufhaus war, allerdings nur im Erdgeschoss und im ersten Stock. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about the building also later during the talk. But first I would like to introduce my guests. Asad, I have also pinned this down in German. So he was born 1974 from Pakistani immigrants in Buffalo, and studied literature and film at the Johns Hopkins University in New York. And on the New York University. Er arbeitet immer interdisziplinär, sowohl als Künstler, aber auch als Kurator und eine lange Zeit auch als Sportjournalist, insbesondere Tennis. Von 2016 bis 2017 war er künstlerischer Leiter der Villa Empain in Brüssel und kuratierte zahlreiche Gruppenausstellungen, unter anderem bei der Architekturbiennale in Venedig sowie für das Luma in Aals. Asad Raza begreift seine Kunst als eine aktive, sinnliche Erfahrung und bringt menschliche Akteure mit nicht-menschlichen Organismen, wie beispielsweise Pflanzen und Objekten, zusammen. Er arbeitet prozesshaft und performativ, häufig außerhalb des Museumskontexts. In dem Projekt Untitled, Plot for a Dialogue zum Beispiel von 2017, installierte Raza ein tennisähnliches Spiel in einer entweihten Kirche aus dem 16. Jahrhundert in Mailand. Für seine Arbeit Home Show 2015 bat Asad Raza Künstlerinnen und Freundinnen, Interventionen in seinem eigenen Apartment in New York zu entwickeln und damit auch in sein Leben einzugreifen. Das heißt, die künstlerische Position und das kuratorische Interesse ist sehr eng verwoben. Es gab ein großes Piece, was ich auch noch erwähnen möchte, auf der Whitney Biennale in 2017, Root Sequence Mother Tongue, mit 26 jungen Bäumen, die von sogenannten Human Caretakers im Ausstellungsraum über den Zeitraum der Ausstellung individuell gepflegt und betreut wurden. Das ist also im Prinzip schon so eine Art Vorläufer, mit lebenden Organismen zu arbeiten. Neben vielen anderen Projekten kuratiert er momentan gemeinsam mit Hans-Ulrich Obrist eine von Edouard Glissant inspirierte Ausstellungsreihe. Wenn man sich den in Martinique geborenen französischen Philosoph und Autor mal so kurz ins Gedächtnis ruft, dann ist das eigentlich auch nicht verwunderlich, dass es da ein sehr großes Interesse und sehr viele Schnittstellen gibt. Jetzt stelle ich auch gleich anschließend Gerd Wessolek vor. Die beiden kennen sich auch schon sehr viel länger, als wir uns beispielsweise kennen. Gerd Wessolek hat in den 70er Jahren in Kassel und Göttingen Bodenkunde, Philosophie und Kunst studiert und war von 1995 bis 2018 Leiter des Instituts für Standortkunde und Bodenschutz an der TU Berlin. Seit über 20 Jahren beschäftigt er sich mit der Beziehung zwischen Kunst und Boden. Er ist Begründer von verschiedenen Interessengruppen. Eine heißt Erdtechnologie und eine andere Erde in Gesellschaft und Lehre. Und ein international gefragter Spezialist, der sein Thema in vielfältiger Form zu vermitteln weiß. Dazu gehört auch Kunst, Kunstprojekte, Ausstellungen, konzeptuelle Projekte, Film und Vorträge. Er publizierte auch sehr viel wirklich speziell zu dem Thema Kunst und Erde bzw. Bodenkunde. Also im Druck gibt es ein Handbuch der Bodenkunde mit dem Titel Boden neu positionieren. Es gibt mehrere Veröffentlichungen, die sich so als Böden im Anthropozän zusammenfassen lassen. Aber es gibt auch ganz gezielte Schriften zum Thema On the Aesthetics of Dirt zum Beispiel oder Soil Science and Soil Art. Und jetzt möchte ich mich vielleicht auch mal aus dieser Monolog-Sprecherrolle befreien. How did you meet each other? Somebody told me it was in Berlin. There was this Teufelsberg, and you kind of bumped in there into each other. Was it right?
I don't know if we bumped into each other quite that. Basically, when I was starting to work on this project in Berlin, I knew that I needed a soil scientist who could advise, to become the kind of scientific advisor. And I started asking people, I started looking up people, just looking up the soil science departments in the universities and emailing the people who were the chair. And basically everyone said the same thing, which is you need to talk to Gerd Wessolek. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of like, if 6 different people who I asked about this all said I need to meet Gerd Wessolek, and then I guess I need to meet. But then yes, we did go to Teufelsberg together, and and start working.
And we had a first meeting, and from that I invited him to visit the Teufelsberg, the Devil's Mountain. Maybe you know that from Berlin. It's where all the rubble of World War II was collected and built to a mountain. That's the highest mountain in Berlin, and now it's a recreation place. And in former time it was occupied by the Americans for installing spines and so on. To look a little bit and to hear a little bit what East Germany is doing. So, but that's now far away, and time they changed.
I thought it was quite interesting because it's all the rubbish, like the destroyed buildings from World War II, where they're covered with soil. So you already get a kind of idea about the ability of soil to absorb things, to cover things. I think we have a little problem with one microphone. Is that right?
Is it mine?
I don't know.
I guess it's mine.
So we can.
It was not fixed.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
Better now. Better now. So normally, if this wouldn't be the talk now, you would have come in and met, like it happened to me, one of the cultivators. There are a lot of cultivators also here now, and I'm happy to see them here. And the piece would be you enter this space and you see 3 people working with the soil. And then one thing which happens quite automatically is that you start asking, what are you doing here? What is this all about? And then the soil scientists, the cultivators would start to give you a small introduction in what they are doing. And maybe, Asad, you want to take over?
Sure. Yeah, I'll do it in English. I mean, like Tim is working, actually continuing right now. But basically the work is we are gathering ingredients from around this region which are going to waste essentially, or are produced by industrial processes in bulk. And it can be anywhere from sand to human hair to barley from beer breweries to pigeon droppings from the pigeon coop to iron oxide from water treatment, clay and other things. And although it now looks pretty much, you don't sense all those different materials because they've been absorbed together by the cultivators, mixing and turning over each ingredient and then allowing it to become part of this larger medium. And you also can't tell how much you're sitting on, but we're sitting on about this height of this, which I call neosoil in here. And so the cultivators are in control of that process, and every day they're choosing ingredients to add to the soil, turning the soil over, watering the soil, and essentially cultivating the soil and giving it to visitors who come. So some of you have probably already come here when we weren't doing a talk like this, and you were offered to take some soil with you. And so in a way, the piece is really this constant process of cultivating and giving away soil, of bringing in material, absorbing it into this neosoil, and then sending it back out with visitors.
And Gerd Wessolek was in charge to kind of teach or educate the cultivators in the Berlin piece. So what's the scientific point about what happens here?
Ich werde das mal ein bisschen auf Deutsch erläutern, weil Asad kennt das. Mein Institut war eingebettet in der Fakultät 6, Plan, Bauen, Umwelt. Und so hatte ich zu tun von der Seite der Architektur bis hin zu Umwelttechnik. Und diese Disziplin musste ich mit Lehrveranstaltungen und Forschungen bedienen. Und wenn wir jetzt über Boden sprechen, dann ist das für uns aus der Sicht der Bodenkunde ein urbaner Boden. Urban, weil er im städtischen Raum vorkommt und weil er durch uns Menschen geprägt ist. Also die menschliche Komponente ist stärker als die ursprüngliche geologische Herkunft. Das ist das Besondere an urbanen Böden. Asad nennt ihn Neosoil. Und das ist die künstlerische Herangehensweise, weil sie lauter Dinge auf einmal entdecken, die auch zum Boden gehören, aber die vorher nicht drin waren. Und in der Stadt ist es ähnlich. Wenn Sie an die Industriegeschichte von Essen, Dortmund oder das gesamte Ruhrgebiet denken, Kohleindustrie, Metallverarbeitung. Und das schlägt sich natürlich nieder in der Qualität der Freilandflächen. Und man hat jahrelang versucht zu fragen, ist diese Belastung ein Problem? Müssen wir das sanieren? Und dafür gibt es inzwischen Kriterien, Richtwerte und auch Verbotswerte. Man darf nicht irgendwas abkippen mehr, was früher noch normal war, wie Hausmüll. Das ist alles inzwischen verboten. Und wir werden wahrscheinlich noch mal 30 Jahre brauchen, bis die Standorte, die sehr schwer belastet sind, nach und nach saniert worden sind. Bei vielen Standorten sagt man eigentlich heute, wenn nicht eine akute Gefährdung davon ausgeht, für das Grundwasser oder für die lebenden Organismen, dann kann man das auch so akzeptieren und dann erkennt man diese Flächen, dass sich in eine interessante Vegetation entwickelt. Und die dann meistens auch unter Schutz gestellt wird. Und diese Entwicklung der letzten 30, 40 Jahren hat sich in meiner Disziplin niedergeschlagen. Und ich versuche mit meinen wenigen Mitteln die Aufmerksamkeit stärker dadurch zu erreichen, dass ich Künstler in meine Arbeit einbezogen habe, weil sie es einfach viel besser können, die Dinge runterzubrechen und auch die Aufmerksamkeit dafür zu erzielen. Wir Wissenschaftler sind nicht gut trainiert, um irgendwelche Dinge so zu erklären, dass sie gut verstanden werden. Und durch die Zusammenarbeit mit der Kunst ist es halt einfach, naturwissenschaftliche Kriterien zu benutzen, aber auch Kriterien aus der Kunst, die wir nicht benutzen dürfen. Ich darf in der Wissenschaft nicht provozieren, ich darf sie nicht reizen, ich darf sie nicht ärgern, ich darf nichts Falsches behaupten. Aber in der Kunst können wir sehr viel stärker damit agieren und das bedeutet eine Potenzierung der Möglichkeiten.
Okay, to give you just a brief idea, in the beginning, Gerd started with talking about the urban soil, and then he ended up with his focus and interest in art, dealing with soil, because he said in art it's possible to mediate scientific knowledge in a completely different way. So I think this is an interesting point, but maybe you can also connect this with the first version of absorption in Australia, because this was was not a scientific idea, but was also the idea to create a new landscape or a new site.
Yeah, the soil science part of it came once we got going into the project, but the initial impetus of the project was that I had been asked to do this public art project series called the Caldor Public Art Projects in Australia, in Sydney. And while I was there, just talking to people and thinking about what I might do, all the conversations that were going on in Sydney and in Australia generally had to do with the relationship to the place, like the relationship to the land, the relationship of indigenous people, relationship of colonialism to land and to identity. And it struck me that these issues were very, they were quite difficult issues, but I was very impressed at how Australians were really going at it and thinking through these issues. And so I thought it'd be interesting to try and make a project where we make new land, because land seemed to be the kind of subject underneath all of these conversations. And so the idea of making new land that could then create parts of a new landscape out of the industrial world was sort of the beginning of the project. And then at that point, John Caldor, who runs that series, said, like, well, we need to work with scientists. And that's when we went to meet soil scientists in Sydney, including one of Gerd's colleagues who he knows for many years, Alex McBratney, who's a pretty notable soil scientist who happens to work in Sydney. And that's when we got going into soil science. Eventually, when the project happened, something that kind of amused me about it, which I still think I like that about it, is that Alex and some of his soil science colleagues came to the show in Sydney and they talked about it with me very excitedly, but with zero reference to art. They just talked about it as an interesting soil science experiment where we were trying to make an artificial soil using all these things, and how that was very interesting. And then they left, and I was kind of like, for them, that was not art. It was actually just a soil science project. And I kind of like that it has this duality where it could, it's okay for someone to perceive it that way. But it really came at the beginning more from these thoughts about land and identity.
Und vielleicht kann ich da ganz kurz berichten. Or here, the experience the cultivators can tell us later is super positive in terms of that's a universal piece, that a lot of people feel really attracted by soil, like coming in, and it's a bit weird, of course, the first impression, what are these people doing with soil in the building, but it's something where a lot of people can refer to and have remembrance, and it's already the smell which kind of triggers some remembrance. So I think it's super beautiful that you have the scientific part, you have the art part, and you have this part of universal Vertrautheit im Deutschen, that you can, like almost everybody can refer to it, but very seldom soil is so much in the focus. We take it for granted. It's everywhere, but it's never in the focus. And so this is maybe another aspect of also the scientific dealing with soil. It's suddenly something which is every day, everywhere, gets questioned and gets researched.
Yeah. One can ask Asad, is soil science maybe also dangerous for art because you're not so free anymore to do what you want?
That's a very interesting question. I think it's true, in a way, once you have this, because I guess you could say in traditional plastic arts, we don't need to make a real viable fertile soil, because you just display the soil in a vitrine, or you display it in a kind of untouched, like a classic example would be in land art, like Walter de Maria's Earth Room, where you look at the soil, but you never touch it, and you don't take it home and use it to grow something. So in a traditional plastic art sense, I think the science would be a limitation. But I was very interested to go towards making an actual material that can really be used and that can actually function, which I guess goes against this classic Kantian idea of art as useless. And so in that sense, I would say soil science more like helps me, because I want people to take the soil away. So if the idea of the project is to make land, or to make a holistic or a fertile medium and then give it to visitors, more in the vein of Felix Gonzalez Torres, or artists where you take something from the gallery, then the soil has to be actually usable and non-toxic, and that's where I need to work with people like Gerd. And a nice side effect of it has been that I learned that soil scientists are similar to artists in many ways, and many of them are artists, including Gerd and Alex McBratney, who both also paint and have been quite seriously pursuing their own artwork for many years. So, but what I think they have in common, which from my perspective in addition, is that they tend to be very passionate about what they're doing and very energized about it in a way that makes them kind of fun to hang out with. So I feel that there's something about in soil science that's people who get into it really get into it.
Okay, yeah. And for you, how do you feel it? Are you more interested in explanation, how the soil can take up water, nutrients, and so on, and how the genesis of the soil is? Or is it for you more, oh, this is art, this has to do something with art. It's soil is coming home in our room. I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? So how do you feel it? That would be interesting to ask our audience maybe later. It's your decision.
Everybody is welcome to take the shoes off. I think maybe we keep on talking for a minute, but indeed, if you have a question, or if you want to bring in a completely different subject or another side subject, you're very welcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is the soil, is it fertile? So if I take it home and put it in a pot or something, can I grow something with it?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
It's pitch dropping.
It's interesting because there was a piece recently I saw where there was a whole bunch of colored soil piled up in a gallery, and I was looking and I was thinking, basically the soil was taken from probably a fertile state and made infertile because they poured all this paint on top of it or something. So you could say this piece is a little bit the opposite of that. And in addition, I think I should bring up there that not only is it incorporating all of these materials which we mentioned before, but it's also incorporating an artwork, another artwork by another invited artist who's sitting there, Rene Morales Garcia, who has been making each day in the room over on that side of the space these sculptures made out of unfired clay, a kind of orbs. In a piece called From Earth to Earth, and each day at 3:30 we actually transform one of those orbs into the soil. So in a way that's where it again goes sort of slightly further away from soil science maybe, and goes closer to something like a culture or maybe a ritual, which we developed here. And I think it's been very interesting and quite sort of beautiful for me, especially considering that this is all part of the Ruhr Triennale and Urbane Künste Ruhr, that this kind of ritual every day at 3:30 developed, and not at all directed by me or directed by even Rene, more from the cultivators just finding their own way of doing this transformation each day. So if you get the chance to come back on another day at 3:30, I think it's worth it to see that moment. It kind of has a power in that moment, and in that moment also an artwork is transformed into another artwork, which is also something that you can take away. There's some interesting layers that happen there, and of course I'm very happy to have that collaboration also inside of the project.
And Asad, you should go on to that argument or question. Can I take the soil home to what is here? Place you have sex or something small.
Yeah, we have sex.
Yeah. So you can carry it away, and I guess the crew is happy when you take 1 ton with you, at least.
Yes, totally. And at the end, there are several places are going to take some. I think we had talked about the Folkwang Museum, maybe having some for their plantings, and also the Botanical Garden in Bochum, and other places which need larger amounts. They are also going to take it, and if anyone here needs a large amount for a new garden, a backyard, or another project that you're doing where you're growing things, you can come at the end of the piece and bring, you know, if you bring a larger, we have sacks like this, but if you bring a truck, you can take a few tons. It's not a problem.
René, are you in the mood to talk a bit about From Earth to Earth?
Yeah, sure. You guys want?
Yeah, sorry for this kind of surprise.
No worries. Yeah, sure. Like Asad said, it's been quite a beautiful process. It was also quite a surprise for me to be invited because I applied as a cultivator, and I was asked about what my relationship to soil is. And like many people, I first didn't have like a direct answer to what exactly soil means to me, but my first relationship was my artwork. And I work a lot with ceramic. I've been working with a process of performances, let's say, where I make something out of clay, and I let it dry, and I don't fire it, and then I basically break it down or transform it, and then in like a performative event, usually I put water in it and work it again into clay that you can work again into another thing, into another object. And so once I told Asad that he was, it just really fits with this work because it's about processes, how artwork can be transformed, how energy flows from one way to another. And he invited me to come, also Britta, of course, to come work and produce basically these spheres, which you can also see at the end of the talk. You're allowed to go into the room and see them and feel them. So I'm creating twice a week these spheres out of clay, and I'm letting them dry, and then, like Asad said, every day at 3:30, one gets transformed, and it's for me it's really beautiful that the pieces that are being made, like to make them, it takes quite a bit of effort, a lot of physical energy, and the energy that flows into it, for me, the way I see it is it doesn't get lost. It gets transformed into the earth, into the soil, into the neosoil. So it becomes part of the soil, and it lives on, and it also helps the soil become fertile. So also, I wanted to answer your question as well. I, like a week ago, I mixed this soil with a lot of other like substrat and other soils, and all of my room plants are now with this soil as well. So it's really beautiful to also think, okay, this is really nice because it's not like, it's just so much energy that's flowing into the plants right now in my room. Like, it's sort of like my energy is there, but also mostly the cultivator's energy, it's there.
No.
So yeah, that's also a really beautiful kind of poetic thought that I get to see every day. And also, if anyone's wondering, is the soil fertile? My plants are literally so happy right now. They're really like uptight, and they seem super happy, so I think it's very fertile.
It's not only the magic performance without author, it was also a magic meeting somehow between René, who studied at Art Academy in Münster, and Asad, and then getting to work together for this piece. And there are two more artists involved. Both are not here. One is Agatha Gotta-Snape. She is from Australia, and she invented this vest the cultivators have. If you look in front of René's room, you see, it's very nice, the shivering jacket, which is also part of the aesthetic of this piece for the cultivators. And we have the Toni Konrad, which is an audio work, or originally it was a film and audio installation. Toni Konrad is an experimental filmmaker and musician from Buffalo, and unfortunately he died in 2016. He taught at Buffalo University, and so he was very influential for a lot of artists, and now he gets more and more received. And this audio work with the title 10 Years on the Infinite Plane is also kind of, as it was made for this, is really creates an atmosphere, melancholic atmosphere. It's a very long loop and very nice. So, also ich würde jedem auch noch mal empfehlen, hinten in den Raum zu gehen. Da sieht man auch sehr schön an den Lampen, wie hoch die Erde liegt. Das ist alles so verschoben. Da sieht man noch so einen kleinen Boiler und Kacheln, sodass man auch ein Gefühl kriegt für die Ästhetik von dem Gebäude. Das war jetzt zu Sparkassenzeiten so eine Art Waschraum. Vorne der kleine Raum, wo die Credit-Tafel hängt, da war der Geldautomat. Also das ist jetzt auch etwas, was mich aus kuratorischer Perspektive interessiert. Ich habe ja gesagt, ich würde gerne ein Kaufhaus nutzen, weil die Kaufhauskultur jetzt irgendwie auch an ihr Ende gekommen zu sein scheint. Also insbesondere mit Corona, da haben ja dann die ganzen Karstadt und Hertie und Kaufhofzentralen zugemacht. Und gleichzeitig war das ja so ein demokratisches Versprechen und auch nochmal eine ganz andere Art von Ort, an dem man alles bekommt und eigentlich auch alle einkaufen gehen. Also, und diese ganze Frage nach Leerständen in den Innenstädten ist ja ein wirklich virulentes Thema, auch gerade im Ruhrgebiet. Und ich fand es interessant, diese Idee mit dem Kultivieren der Erde zusammenzubringen, eben mit einem leerstehenden Kaufhaus. Und hier, dieses Altbaugebäude hat eine sehr interessante Geschichte. Das ist 1927, 28 entstanden für die Altbau, für die erste soziale Wohnungsbaugesellschaft nach dem Ersten Weltkrieg, weil einfach in Essen sehr viele Wohnungen gebaut wurden. Und eben im ersten Stock, zweite Stock Kaufhaus. Danach war es mal SPD-Parteizentrale. Jetzt zuletzt haben sich das die AWO und die Sparkasse geteilt. Wir haben es jetzt gemietet von der POHA Housing, die hier so eine Art Co-Living, Co-Working Space entwickeln werden in Zukunft. Vielen Dank auch nochmal, dass wir das zwischennutzen konnten. Und insofern bildet das Gebäude eigentlich auch sehr interessant die Geschichte, ja nicht nur der Region, sondern eigentlich im Grunde die deutsche Geschichte ab in gewisser Weise. Und in Verbindung mit der Erde, wo man weiß, dass sie einerseits sehr viel in sich gespeichert hat an Historie, dass sie aber als Neosoil auch in der Lage ist, neue Dinge hervorzubringen, finde ich, gibt es diese interessante metaphorische Ebene von Archiv und von dem Beginn von etwas Neuem.
Vielleicht sogar eine Vision, dass in der Innenstadt nicht mehr so viele Gebäude gebraucht werden, so viele Leute nicht mehr in der Innenstadt wohnen. Stellen Sie sich vor, auf einmal der Überbau ist weg, dann hätten wir wieder Boden. Das ist also, wofür meine Community wirbt. Weniger Versiegelung, weg mit den Flächenversiegelung und wieder Boden, der atmet und der sich bepflanzen lässt und nutzen lässt. Maybe a vision, Asad, your experiment and your artwork is a vision, maybe. One day this building does not exist anymore and we have soil again.
No, true.
Sure, you're not excited.
No. I completely, because in that sense, you could say that like all of this around us, this urban fabric, all of these buildings, just like Teufelsberg, you know, which is a pile of rubble, but now it looks like a mountain. You don't realize anymore that this was already a place and now it's looking like something that was always there as part of, quote, nature. Yeah, completely. In that sense, something about this project is, I think, interesting that it essentially reverses the direction of the industrial process, that the industrial process tends to take the landscape and separate it into different components and then use those components for various things. And in this project, we collect them again and then recombine them or absorb them. And in that sense, it also relates to Tony Conrad's work, because I think with Tony Conrad's music, if you go in that room and listen later, it's all based on drones that are absorbing a lot of different frequencies at one time, and so you're getting this kind of frequencies at once, and it's kind of like a holistic sound that's very dense, and the world can be like that too in a way. It doesn't always have to be about separating. Yep. So in some sense, music tends to be, some form of music are really about listening to all these sounds in isolation or separated, and I think that Tony Conrad's music is really goes in the other direction.
Hier war noch eine Frage, ne?
Maybe not a question, but there was a question about how we feel, how we feel when we're inside here and touching the soil, for example. And so I thought about that, and I thought that it's rather rare to really touch the open soil. So because we normally have plants or pavement above the soil, so we don't touch it really, or we don't feel it, we don't see it sometimes. So the only thing or the only place where we normally get in touch is on the beach, when we go there with our bare feet, but not on open soil or different soil types. So it's rather rare to really be close to soil, and to, maybe not be close to soil means that we cannot really connect to soil, and which makes it easier to put pavement on it and to forget about it, that it's there and that it actually feeds us and that it gives us a lot, but we maybe not give so much back. So that's very interesting, and that's what I was thinking about, but also about the parts and the organics and the compartments you put into the soil and you mix in the soil. So I wanted to ask, from a scientific point of view and from an art point of view, when you absorb the material in the soil, and it's, as you said, waste material at a certain point, with some compartments which might be toxic, so what happens when the soil absorbs it? What happens as an organism, and is it just absorption or is it also more than that? And what happens with these compartments in the soil?
Will you start to give it?
I had a feeling you were going to make me answer this. Okay. It's a very good question. And for the first half of what your comment, I want to say I'm very happy that you say that it brings you into contact, because in some sense I think the way to bring you into contact with a topic, let's say, is to put you into contact with it literally more than to tell you about it. So it's less about information transfer and more about an experience. But for the question, what happens, so for instance, one of the materials that's in the soil is actually the shredded programs from the Ruhr Ding exhibition, which Britta and the Urbane Künste Ruhr did earlier this summer. And so we're not only absorbing byproducts of the industrial process, which you can think about kind of what you would normally imagine, but also the byproducts of the culture industry and fabric from the theater productions and other things like that. So these things are not always free completely of, as you say, toxins, but what I learned from my collaborations with soil science is that toxicity is not about, it's not just present or absent. So something like copper, for instance, is present in trace amounts in the landscape, very typically. But if you isolate copper and mine copper and just have a pile of copper sitting there, it's toxic because it's or lead or manganese or other heavy metals. So once you distribute them into a certain amount of rarity in an amount of material, then you're okay again. And so one of the things that I would like to do further is we do every day test the pH of the soil and other aspects of it, but it would be amazing to be able to do that even further, to test heavy metal concentrations. But essentially what we do now is we are careful not to for instance, this total mass here is about 150 to 200. I don't know if it's grown now, so it's maybe closer to 200 tons of neosoil, and we know what amounts of certain things we can put that will not possibly increase the concentration of other elements. So it's a little bit more complicated than there's either toxins in the soil or not, but it's a very, very good question. I do think that the future for this piece if it has a future, is to go a little bit deeper even into that, to where this soil can even be used to remediate soil in the landscape that is toxic, because this is a big problem that people don't really know exactly how to approach. Basically, the solution to soil toxicity is like you ship that soil out and you just bury it somewhere. So I think that that's not really satisfying, but yeah, I do think that there could be a future piece which has been in my mind a little bit, which would be maybe called reabsorption, where you take this material and you recombine it with a landscape where maybe there is a problem with toxicity, and you try to actually work with that somehow and neutralize that.
Ich kann das noch ein klein bisschen ergänzen, aber zunächst auf Ihren Hinweis. Sie sitzen ja hier barfuß. Das finde ich schön, weil der unmittelbare Kontakt mit dem Boden ist da und dieser Kontakt bewirkt etwas in uns, assoziiert zu Urlaubserinnerungen oder Kindheitserinnerungen. Später haben wir den Kontakt nicht mehr unmittelbar, es sei denn, wir bepflanzen Blumenpötte oder gärtnern ein kleines bisschen. Jetzt aber noch mal zu den Fremdstoffen oder Stoffen, die man in den Boden geben kann oder nicht sollte, muss man besser sagen. 30 Jahre lang hat unsere Community dafür gekämpft, für ein Bodenschutzkonzept und für Bodenschutzgesetzgebung. Und das bedeutet, man weiß ganz genau, wie die Verteilung von Schwermetallen oder Aromaten oder was auch immer im Boden sein kann, sein darf. Aber was auf jeden Fall nicht mehr erlaubt ist, Sie können nicht einfach irgendwelche Stoffe da reinpacken in größerem Stil. Das ist verboten. Das verbietet die Bodenschutzgesetzgebung. Und das ist gut so, weil früher, als ich noch Kind war, wurden auf Flächen, die nicht mehr genutzt wurden, zum Beispiel alte Baugruben oder sowas, da wurde alles Mögliche verkippt, der gesamte Hausmüll. Und das ist alles nicht mehr erlaubt, weil der Boden jetzt geschützt ist. Er ist aber nur eingeschränkt geschützt, weil wir ja permanenten Flächenverbrauch haben von 40 Hektar pro Tag. Das ist unglaublich viel. Und diese Flächen, die werden rausgenommen aus den Stoffkreisläufen, auch aus dem Klimakreislauf, Wärmehaushalt, Einstrahlung, Verdunstung, Stichwort. Und die Folgen dieser zunehmenden Flächeninanspruchnahme, das wird uns vielleicht so ein bisschen klar, wenn wir hier auf einmal unmittelbar den Boden sehen, der ja alles zulässt. Und Sie riechen das ja auch, der atmet und hat einen Gashaushalt. Und wir Menschen, ja, wir verändern das peu à peu mit unabsehbaren Folgen der Globalisierung. Und die Frage ist, ob es auch wieder uns gelingen könnte, das zurückzuführen, abzumindern. Und ein paar positive Aspekte sehen wir heute in der Architektur und auch in der Mobilitätsdiskussion und auch in der Landwirtschaft, die wahrscheinlich nicht mehr so bleiben kann, wie wir sie jetzt in den letzten 30 Jahren gewohnt waren. Sorry, Asad, I just explained some stuff in German that.
No problem.
No, I just wanted to add that, of course, in the Ruhr area we have a lot of experience with toxic soil, but it was very common somehow also to have like a deponey, and then there's 30, 50 centimeters new soil and grass on top. Some of the parks are still a deponey underneath. So this is also a good reason to bring Asad with the piece in the Ruhr area. And what Asad mentioned, like the opposite movement of extraction, is also super interesting. I think not only to take all the things you need somehow, but to think of the soil and the integrants as one wall.
Yeah, thanks. And I just want to kind of come back to the point where you said that the experience of being here, the smell, the haptics of soil, that's something I do really appreciate. And I'm not sure whether you have had an opportunity to visit in the Polish Institute in Düsseldorf, Diana Lelonik's exhibition, which is more, say, the new digital stuff. Yeah, and I think everything is now digitalized somehow. But as the other lady also said, the haptic and the smell raises some, say, questions also and some experience. And I do think this is really a central point. regarding the soil toxic thing, it's interesting what you mentioned here, that you really, I mean, that's maybe the scientist's part of it, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to sit in here, at least not here in Germany, I think, but also in other countries, depending on the so-called Grenzwerte. But yeah, I've taken some, I've been here, and I was surprised how it became kind of sandy outside. It was then dry weather around, and it became like sandy, and I saw a piece of a tüte, I think, and that was interesting. And to see it being absorbed into another soil. So a little bit like your idea with the flowers. Thanks.
Yeah, that's just, I mean, the sand is also something that we have a lot of here, and there's very, you know, this region has a lot of sources of sand. So I also perceive it as having a slightly higher proportion of sand as the soil that we made in Gropiusbau and the soil that we made in Sydney. And these kind of variations based on what you find in a place also happen. But just to get back to your observation of the haptics, I mean, I think that's a good word to use. I think we often, very often walk on ground that has been paved for us to be able to not think about what we're walking on, and just walking on an uneven ground sort of wakes up certain aspect of your proprioception, that your sense of your body in the world, that is interesting to me. So I was always very, you know, one of the things that I always think is nice is when the cultivators do this work of turning over everything, it means that there never happens that there's paths that are very sort of flat, because everything gets turned over every day, and that's deliberate because of the reasons that you say.
Maybe to add about the sand, we have sand which is 80 million years old. So this is crazy. Christopher, who was in charge of the indigrants, or to collect the indigrants, he always said this is the planetary dimension. And I think it's quite amazing. And this is also a result of soil science to find out that this sand must be 80,000.
We can predict. We can predict it. We have so many possibilities to say something about the age, about the weathering degree, about the ratios of the elements, about isotopes, and so on. That's unbelievable. We do not actually know it per square meter, but you can probably distinguish the age and the location of a sample, let's say by 10 kilometers or something like that. That's unbelievable. And maybe something again to what you're feeling with the soil and your emotions. That is nice to organize if you have a party for kids or young people. You can prepare easily small pots, and then you have maybe organic material, Blumen Erde or something like that. You can prepare gravel, you can prepare a silty soil, a sandy soil, and a clay soil, and then the kids move on these spots. It's so funny, and they look so happy. We often did it in my home, and then I got the impression, oh, we are, in the normal life, we are losing the contact. We are not anymore grounded, or I don't know, maybe something like that. Ja.
Wir führen noch ein zweites Gespräch, und zwar, wenn wir dem Botanischen Garten Erde schenken, unter anderem anlässlich 700 Jahre Bochum. Das ist sozusagen unser Beitrag. Und da spricht Alicia Dancia ganz explizit auch mit den Cultivators, die ein bisschen erzählen über ihre Erfahrungen hier. Und René ist auch noch mal dabei und erzählt auch noch mal von ihrem Projekt. Wir haben das jetzt so ein klein bisschen gesplittet. Aber das, was du am Anfang gesagt hast, dass man eben bei dieser Erde nicht mehr sagen kann, wo sie genau herkommt, das finde ich ist jetzt auch auf eine metaphorische Art sehr interessant, dass dieses Neosoil oder Artificial Soil wirklich heißt, es ist eben nicht 100% lokalisierbar von wo sie stammt.
Ja, das ist schwierig, weil die Fremdbeimengungen so groß sind, dass die gesamte Komposition nicht mehr inhärent ist. Ja. Also das ist dann leider Gottes so. Es ist, ja.
You know, we're talking about, he said that normally in a piece of 10 square meters or something, you can always say, this is Europe, this is where we are, this is our soil, and here, Neosoil, you have so many different ingredients, so it gets difficult to make this scientific mark.
The genetic fingerprint.
Yeah, and I think this is a very interesting idea.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not really a. I have another project with trees, and where you grow trees inside a museum. And in that project, I was always saying that we can select trees that can grow in this region, and then later you plant them outdoors, and that they can survive in this region, but they don't need to be native to this place, because this discourse of what is native to a place for me is a little bit. It's tricky, and I think it has to be. One has to think very carefully about that before you just say that we only want native things, or this kind of conversation.
Yeah, it leads to the discussion. This is our soil, blood and soil. We all know these discussions, and
This, for example, is, if I may interrupt, in Zollverein pit area, fascinating. I mean, if one is interested in the, say, fauna and flora, that according to specialists, some flora is there, which may have origins in Australia, from the coal or some other parts. And that's fascinating because this mixes, I mean, it's what I think you might want to express, that there is no such soil as my soil or your soil, but our.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Ich gucke jetzt noch mal so in die Runde. Gibt es noch jemand, der gerne was? Ja.
Joseph?
Ja, okay.
Also ich würde jetzt auch gerne was sagen, aber auf Deutsch. Vielleicht kann jemand anders das übersetzen. Ich bin hier einer von den Cultivators und ich habe mich gemeldet, beworben hierfür, weil ich diese Idee toll fand vom Asad, dass man in Erde etwas hineingibt, weil das ist ja etwas, was wir immer machen, schon seitdem wir geschichtlich zurückdenken können. Und ich finde das immer ganz toll, wenn Leute hier reinkommen, Kinder, die laufen hier durch den Raum und freuen sich, weil sie Erde erleben. Also Sie sprachen das auch an mit dem Kontakt eben. Dann kam ein Mann in einem ganz teuren Anzug, der auch ganz teure Schuhe anhatte. Und ich habe ihm gesagt, ja, ziehen Sie doch bitte die Schuhe aus, dann können Sie hier rein. Er wollte nämlich nicht reinkommen, weil er Angst hatte, dass seine teuren Schuhe durch den Sand zerstört werden. Hat er ja auch recht. Der kam rein und dann hat er sich dort vor Renés Raum gestellt und war total freudig. Und ich sagte, darf ich ein Foto machen? Da sagt er ja. Und dann stellt er sich so dahin und strahlte. Er hat im Grunde etwas überwunden, nämlich wieder so ein bisschen was Kindliches gefunden. Dann habe ich auch so den Eindruck, dass es ganz viele Dimensionen gibt. Da sind eben schon eine ganze Menge angesprochen worden. Und es gibt diese Dimension dieser Millionen Jahre, dass der Sand so alt ist. Dann aber auch die Vorstellung, wir laufen ja nur ein Sandkorn lang hier über diese Erde. Dann dieses Projekt Earth to Earth, das regt viele Leute an zu überlegen, dass der Ton, der kommt ja jetzt, sagen wir mal, nicht aus dem Ruhrgebiet. Die meisten anderen Sachen kommen ja aus dem Ruhrgebiet und werden hier eingebracht. Der kommt aus dem Westerwald, aus dem Kannebecker Land, so viel wie ich gehört habe. Und da ist dann, sagen wir mal, Earth to Earth. Und dann kommt die Idee, ja, wenn wir das dann mitnehmen, die Erde, dann bringen wir die Erde ja woanders hin. Nach Mörs, heute waren welche von Bottrop da. Und dieses hier etwas bekommen, um das woanders hinzutragen, das ist irgendwie das hat eine ganz starke Dimension. Jeder erlebt das anders für sich. Manche, die sagen, ach ja, ich kann das zu Hause irgendwie einem Baum schenken. Oder die haben Ideen, was sie mit dieser Erde machen werden. Und das finde ich Kunst. Da löst diese Erde und dieses Projekt etwas aus bei den Menschen. Und das finde ich toll.
Vielen, vielen Dank, dass du das jetzt auch nochmal so beschrieben hast. The idea of taking something out of this space is very important for the whole organism that keeps kind of being absorbed somewhere else or being healthy and helpful for planting somewhere else. So it's not the idea to have an installation which is finished. Everything is always in the move and things get out here in the 25th of September. And as Asad said, everybody is really welcome to think about where could I use some of the soil, or maybe the kindergarten of the daughter, or whatever the school. So we are giving this as a present, and 200 tons is almost as much as 30 elephants, to give you an idea. So it's really a lot of stuff in here. I think maybe it's a good moment to stop the talk if there is not an urgent comment or question, because there's so many things to talk about. So we could talk probably till tomorrow or something, but I also don't want to keep you too long. So feel free to contribute, but we can also kind of take this, what we heard and discussed, and keep on thinking about it. So it's very nice, the sound of the cultivators. We can also maybe now take off the chairs, and you can experience the piece without chairs.
I think that's a good idea. And we could maybe we just all each carry our chairs to the side or so.
Ja, ja. Aber wenn wir uns jetzt auflösen, möchte ich mich noch einmal ganz herzlich bedanken bei Alicia Danscher, meine kuratorische Assistenz, und bei dem ganzen Team von Urbane Künste Ruhr, die das jetzt wirklich super perfekt organisiert hat. Und ja, wir haben Aufzeichnungen gemacht, also man kann das dann später auch noch mal angucken und vielleicht verschicken. Thank you, Asad.
Thank
for
you.
the talk. Thank you, Gerd.
Thank you.